Okay.
Oh, I was supposed to remind you about that.
And now you will all have a dialogue saying that this session is recorded and you can do with it whatever you want. So if you don't want your face to be seen in the archives of eternity, you can turn your camera off. But I would like you to leave your microphones off for this small segment, because when we start, it's my duty to say that we're part of the Agile 20 Reflect Festival. No, what I wanted to say. Before we start talking, I want to say something, and this is a tribute to Karl Marx, who you see in the corner. And what I want to say...
That's Groucho Marx.
Groucho Marx.
Karl Marx
we
not
have
as funny.
to re-record everything from the beginning.
That's okay.
Marx, yeah. So, and what I want to say is that we're part of a festival called Agile 20 Reflect. And I would love to dedicate this session to Scott, who I had the chance to accompany from the beginning of this idea until it became this monstrous thing with a will of its own and lots of organization. And is Lao Tzu said, I don't know, probably you will find a better version of it, but the best of leaders, no one knows they're there, right? Or when a great leader does it, the people think it was done by itself. It was something like that, right?
Yeah, that'll do.
So now I would love you to turn on your microphones and just give a big hand for Scott, okay? Yes, great. You can tweet if you know how to tweet, and you can put anything on social media if you know how and you want to. And that's the part of talking about the connection to the festival. And now I want to start the session. So the reason we're here is because I found years ago a book which looked like this and was written in Hebrew, still is written in Hebrew, that sort of changed my life. And it took me quite a few years to realize that these two worlds, the one which I was working in, which is a agile, whatever, transformation, Scrum Master, whatever you call it, and the Taoist mindset are one and the same. And when I realized it, I was so excited that I wrote an article on LinkedIn, and I took, I think, a day to write it and then rewrite it, and I took 2 hours just to draw the image that you see here. And I was really proud of the idea that I'm the first one in the world who thinks about this. And then I received a comment from this guy called Peter Merel, who said, of course, Lao Tzu is the first agile coach, and I've been working over 30 years, it's somewhere here, right? Over 30 years on translating this small book which contains 80 poems or something like that. And we started talking, and we found that we have a common interest in this. And not only this, Peter's book is, as we talked before we started the recording, is never finished, like always changing. And my idea was, in fact, this is why I was so excited about his book. His book was a translation of the Book of Tao, which I'll describe later what it is, into not English, but agility. So he took all of the views of something that was written theoretically, and I'm sure that you will interrupt me when I say this, was written 2,500 years ago into a different language of a different era, of a different context, while everything is the same. And my dream when I saw his book was to bring this into the people who need it, because I think a lot of people in our world are missing a big mindset shift. Like they see agility as something to apply in organization and not something to breathe life through. So that's how we met. That's how we got into this place. And I would like to start today by the story of the book, which will take me about 15 minutes. So if you're not interested, you can come back in 15 minutes. And then the agenda is that I don't really know what we'll do. So
Can I interrupt for just one moment, Dov?
sure, you can always.
One of the differences between Dov's approach to the book and mine is that, and this is a very traditional difference. It's sort of there's even a name for this, sort of a Dao Jiao versus Dao Jiao. But and I don't speak any Chinese to speak of. Most of my book learning when it comes to Chinese is exactly that. That's okay, because the way I look at it, this story is a myth, a Chinese myth that was created to sort of make certain that these ideas would be transmitted from dynasty to dynasty. But there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that this was not originally a Chinese book, that it was translated poorly into Chinese, and people have been trying to make up for the poverty of the translation ever since. So since we don't have the original, in my view, we can take a lot of liberties with it. But Dov's going to, I think, give you the sort of let's be respectful story, which is cool.
No, I'm never respectful. So I'm going to tell the story of the book as I understand it, and I read the story in this book. So today, this morning, to refresh, I read a little bit again, and it's written totally different from how I remember it.
Enjoy.
So,
tell your story, and I'll tell mine after.
So what I want to say is that this story, as all stories, is false, and this story, as all stories, is true. Take it as a story, as a point of inspiration. Okay, so a long time ago, about, let's say, for the sake of argument, 2,500 years, in the big empire of China that you see behind me, in a map that I found somewhere, and perhaps it's not even the map of China, who knows, there was a time of change. And the time of change came because iron was invented and put into a system that was stable. So before iron was invented, people would make enough food to support themselves, and a little bit more to support the emperor, to support the all the mechanisms of the army and the empire, and give some riches to the emperor of China. And then iron was invented into the system, and people started to produce more than they needed. And commerce started, and the pirates on desert roads, like you see here, like this one, started appearing, and fighting started, and the empire started crumbling. And the emperor of China, which was a very smart man, because he knew how to choose smart consultants, didn't know what to do. So he asked his consultants. First, he asked this guy, a logical guy, I don't know what his name was in the story, which was the head of the army. And he said, top-down management, use force. So what you should do is recruit an army and control any rebellion, any crumbling, control the people strongly, and you will succeed. And he asked another guy who was a very smart one, a creator of processes and reorganizations, which was called Confucius. And Confucius, as you see in the story, was a well-groomed person with really nice eyebrows, wearing silk, and he was great in creating social order. And what he proposed is create social order. So I would advise you to create a new religion where you are on the top, below you the head of every canton, below them the head of every family, below them the firstborn of the man, of course, of every family, and below them all of the other brothers, and below them the women. So that we have a hierarchy where no one has the interest to rebel, because everyone who rebels has something to lose. Smart. So this is the process consultant, if you want. And yet another guy who is one of the heroes of our story, and his name was Lao Tzu. What's the meaning of Lao Tzu? Like, what do you know, Peter?
Oh, it's basically either the old philosopher or the old philosophy, which is to say there was no one named Lao Tzu.
Don't ruin the story. Don't ruin the story.
I'm not ruining the story. I'm improving the story.
Okay. So this Lao Tzu guy, he was the head of the national library, or like he was a strange fellow. Like, he would go barefoot into the forest. People would say that he would talk to animals. And he basically, I think, didn't give a fuck. And the emperor loved him. So he asked him, what would you advise me to do? And Lao Tzu said, what I understand is, shit happens. Like, the best advice I can give you is, don't try to mess forcefully with how processes are going. Just let things be. And it's a great advice. Only if you're the head of a huge corporation called the Empire of China, and you're about to think what will be the change process, doing nothing is something that's really hard to do. So as much as he appreciated him, he took the advice of Confucius, he took the advice of the army, he mixed between the two, the empire crumbled. Perhaps it would crumble anyway, who knows? And this guy, Lao Tzu, who was already old, as you see in the picture, he was a bit pissed off, I guess. And he said, as I'm already old, and as you don't really need me, probably, I would love you to give me as a gift my life. So let me take my favorite ox and go on a one-way trip to the Himalaya. And the emperor loved him very much, gave him this gift. Only once he parted, the emperor said, in fact, I lost a huge repository of knowledge, of know-how that I don't know how to recover. So we asked all the people that are like all the guards that keep all the roads to the way on the way to the Himalaya, if there's a man who looks a little bit messy and crazy riding on an ox, stop him and don't let him pass before he documents all of his knowledge. And that's what happened. So on the way to the Himalaya, there was someone who stopped him, and every day he would write a poem. Every night they would sip some tea, and when the poem was finished, he handed him a bunch of not paper. It was a bamboo slate, I guess, and went off on his way, and he was never seen again. And this is what we call today the Tao Te Ching, the Book of Tao. And the book contains a set of poems. And some of the poems, when I read them, have a lot of criticism toward the emperor. Like one thing that I remember, sorry if it's not in the version of your translation, says the firstborn of the emperor is worth as much as the smallest tree on the loneliest, the smallest leaf on the furthest tree.
I know where it fits, but it's not in mine.
No?
No, because there's a different frame for rendering that. Well, we'll get into that when I tell a little bit more about. I mean, really, if I believed the story that Dov just told, I never would have attempted the Agile Tao. It would have been really where I sort of come into the story was.
So just let me finish the story, and then we'll.
You go do that.
Awesome. So what I wanted to say is that for me, the real hero of the story is the emperor, because what Lao Tzu left in the hands of his now it was his disciple, was a bunch of bamboo slates, and currently it's a story that is it's a book that is translated in so many versions. It's I think they say it's the most popular Chinese book, the Chinese book with the biggest collection of versions in the world. So this is the story of the book so far, and now I'm sure that you want to say a lot of things, so I'll let you speak.
I never want to say, I'd rather say a little something, but sometimes I'm very long-winded and it takes me a while to get there. So I had a bunch of translations of the book. My late father left me a bunch, and to cut a long story short, I happened across a translation by a guy named Victor Mayer. Mayer is a professor of Sanskrit, and he did a translation that he thought was just for fun, until in reading the Chinese, he started to see a correspondence with another old book, a Vedic classic from, well, the other end of the Silk Road, called the Bhagavad Gita. And Mayer, after studying the philology, the relationships between the words and these things, concluded in his translation that either one of these was a bad translation of the other, or both of them were derived from some lost common ancestor that almost certainly was an oral tradition, because the way that the poetry works is kind of a lot of things that are intended to help you remember things. And I think we should probably, before I tell you more of the story, we should give people a flavor. I should probably put a verse up and just to give people an idea of the sort of thing they can expect if they've never approached it before. So if it's okay, Dov, I'll share a screen for a moment and I'll go back to the story. Okay, so if I go share, I think that one. Let's try that. Okay, well, that wasn't the one I wanted to do. I wanted to do an earlier one, much earlier one. I'll do number 2, at least in my version, it's number 2. Okay, so beauty fades and love dies because all forms are cycles. Chaos evolves passion, hope breaks apart. Sorry, whole breaks apart. Hope breeds fear, weakness supports strength, growth feeds decay, after becomes before. There's lots of little things like that last line, after becomes before, where you're going, oh yeah, that sort of makes it, wait, what? I really love that about this. But anyway, as all forms cycle, agility takes no form, but harmony with the ebb and flow of forms. It anticipates forms without commanding them, adapts them without controlling them, accepts them without containing them. So there's a lot.
One thing that I would love, next time when you read, be closer to the microphone and read slower.
Oh, okay. I'll bring the microphone closer to me. How's that? Bit better?
I think so. And also read slower. We have time. We have 1.5 hours.
All right, but I'll come back. So yeah. Let me stop sharing for a minute because I want to get back to Victor Mayer. So when I read Mayer saying this, Mayer's really, really interesting guy. After he did this translation, he took a trip to a place in China called the Tarim Basin and discovered a bunch of 10,000-year-old mummies. And these mummies, they're not people of the usual stature you would expect in China. They're 6'6" people. And they have red hair and pale skin, and they're dressed in tartan. 10,000-year-old mummies, what are they doing in the middle of the Tarim Basin? Maybe these are the people who turned up with this oral tradition. Who knows? We don't know, and that's sort of the point. Now, by the time I read this translation, I'd actually already produced a translation. I had produced it through a bunch of Q&A over about a 3-year period with a bunch of actual sinology professors on the old sinology or Taoism studies list that the Australian National University used to run back in the 90s. But from my point of view, I thought I was just trying to understand this. I put a after I finished that Q&A with them, I put a GNU public license on this and put it out there in the world. And a gentleman named Oliver Benjamin decided he wanted to make a religion, a little bit like what Dov was suggesting, but we're not talking about thousands of years ago. We're talking about a decade ago. Oliver decided he wanted to make a religion about the Big Lebowski. He wanted to call it Dudism. And he asked me if he could use my then translation as the Bible of Dudism. Yeah, all right, as long as you make it free, because it's under a new public license. He said, oh, yeah, happy to distribute it for free. And he did. But he started selling certificates that ought to feel kind of familiar to people in the Agile world. He sold certificates that declared that the bearer of the certificate was a Dudist priest and entitled to marry people. And he sold like 500,000 $20 certificates.
Yeah, I have a friend who just got one for his birthday 3 days ago.
I have the very first one declaring me a Dudist priest. I'm not certain why that's good. But anyway, I guess I can marry people. So
when I get married, I'll get back to you.
Yeah. So after that, I went, okay, well, I either just need to sort of set this thing aside and accept that it's going to be a Dudist thing, or I need to go, wait a second. I want this to actually be, and I spent by that stage, I'd spent probably more like 20 years on diddling with the thing. And I thought, well, what I'd like to do, and we found its way to a bunch of other things. That was the most outrageous of them. I thought, well, let me try and understand this from the Chinese, because I'd understood it by speaking to sinologists. Let me go back to the most literal renditions I can find. The oldest versions of this book aren't even on silk scrolls. The oldest versions are carved into bamboo slats from before the invention of silk, and way before the invention of paper, and even longer before the invention of dictionaries, which gives you quite a lot of license to sort of interpret the pictograms as meaning a great variety of things, because the Chinese pictograms have not really changed very much over the thousands of years, but they've picked up a lot of extra meanings. So if you look in Chinese dictionaries, there are dozens, sometimes hundreds of meanings for a single pictogram, and any one of them might be right when it comes to looking at this old poem. Even worse, the very first Chinese dictionaries date from 300 years after the earliest versions of the poem. So for me, the key that led to the Agile Tao was there's two pictograms, Shengren, which I no doubt am not pronouncing correctly because I don't speak Chinese in that sense. I've just studied the pictograms of this one book. Anyway, and Shengren is usually translated as the sage. Apparently, the sage is this very cool guy, and he does everything properly. And when you read most translations, it's all about the sage this and the sage that, and you want to be like the sage. And I looked at these pictograms, and the literal translation, at least the one that I picked up on, because as I said, there's lots of different translations you could make. The literal translation was the lively ones. And I went, Shengren, lively ones. This thing's talking about agility. Oh, well, if I take that sort of central phrase and I translate it as the agile or as agility, what happens to the rest of the poem? So that was quite interesting. And then I started to realize, thinking about that Victor Mayer thing, that the real problem with this book and all of the translations up to me, at least from my point of view, is it's very much like a jigsaw puzzle where every piece can have multiple different patterns, where people have been diligently polishing each of these individual pieces over many, many thousands of years, but no one's actually tried to refactor the thing into a whole and make a whole end-to-end thing out of it. No one's tried to put the puzzle together. And I thought, well, if I try to make this about agility, then maybe I have a basis for doing that. And if this is from something that turned up as the Bhagavad Gita, which is a completely different book to the Lao Tzu, if you read the two side by side, you'll go, what? This is not the same. It's only when you get down to the philological level that they're same. I thought, well, then the first time I tried to translate this, I was too respectful. Let me be really disrespectful and try to put the puzzle together. So the Agile Tao is basically a work of refactoring. And the cycle that I usually go through is I try to find how to plug bits together until I got something that I think is relatively pleasing. And then in that context, I then go back to the Chinese and go, okay, well, given that context, where have I got it horribly wrong? Because it's always easy to get it horribly wrong, to read things into this that aren't there. Having been at this for 30 years, what I have is mostly up to date, but there are still bits and bobs where I go, I haven't actually revisited that part since 30 years ago. And it's very, I use the phrase Orientalist, which is to say it's all about valleys, spirits, and various kinds of mystical energies. And that's not the context I'm interested in at all. I should also say that there are two popular contexts in China for understanding Lao Tzu. And one is a religious context, which is very respectful and puts it into sort of this Lao Tzu as a deity kind of a thing, attending the great celestial court. And then there's the philosophical version where they will go, well, wait a second, let's look at this in terms of its ideas. These are useful ideas. That's the whole point from our point of view. So that first chapter, or so the second chapter, the one that I just gave a read through, that the last part of that starts to get at things where you go, oh, yeah, okay, that goes to mindset. But there's more concrete, practical stuff here that we can make use of. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so where I want this conversation to go is, let's even take this poem as an example. Can you put it on the screen? And
Yeah.
the question that I always ask you in the podcasts is the same question. If someone today connects to what the poem is trying to say, what will it change in their, I hate this phrase, but I'll use it, the transformation journey? Like, how will they see their path differently? What will they do differently on a practical level?
That's a really good question. We have a common friend, Dan Mezek, and in the business agility conversations on that forum on Facebook, Dan's been asking whether people trying to force agile into an organization produces lasting agility. And I guess I would say that the first part of this poem is kind of refuting the idea of lasting agility, that we live in a world where there's sort of the rising hodge and the rising podge. We have people trying to assert order with frameworks and coaching and to get things just right. And then we have the way that people actually work together, which often has nothing to do with whatever magical thinking is going on around frameworks. And these two are never going to go away. So the idea of lasting agility, that we'll get to some perfect enlightened state, that's probably a bit silly. As agilists, the idea in the third part of this, as all forms cycle, agility takes no form but harmony with the ebb and flow of forms. We're trying to do some good. And if we can improve business throughput, well, that's great. That's what we're hired to do. Lasting agility? I don't give a damn about lasting agility. I give a damn about trying to give people good ways of working together for the purpose of increasing business throughput. And that's not a lasting thing. That's a constant challenge. How's that, Dov?
I'll unmute myself. I think it answers, but like anything else, what do you mean when you say, for example, hope breeds fear and weakness supports strength? Why do I care as an agile coach?
You want to go through line by line from the point of view of an agile coach?
Not really line by line, but I would like to pick the things that are less obvious.
Okay. Well, in many ways, hope and fear are flip sides of the same coin. So when someone hopes that their organization is going to become better in some particular way. It's because it sucks in some particular way. They're afraid that it's going to get worse. Often when people start to say, well, we're going to have an agile transformation, it's going to make everything fantastic, a bunch of people start going, oh crap, oh, they're going to bring in those lean agile guys and I'm going to lose my job. I better start shutting up and doing what they say, which is to say, now I've got two jobs. I got to do the job that they're telling me to do, and because I'm afraid of losing my other job, which is the job that I actually do, which has nothing to do with what these guys are saying. And I'm going to keep doing that in my old way. And when those guys are out of here, I'll go back to that. So that kind of fear-oriented behavior as coaches we see all the time. What else? You ask me, John.
Good demo. I'm not asking anything. What I would love to ask is the people who participate, what does it echo in you?
Hi, Peter. I think the echo that I get from it is we're definitely not in control. You just need to let things go sometimes. And yeah, it's just, well, first of all, recognizing what we don't control, which is most things. And then maybe recognizing the things that we can control, which is so little.
I like the way you put that. It also goes to Dov's sort of nutshell version of shit happens. But at the same time, this is giving a strategy for dealing with that kind of shit. That we don't have an ability to control things, but we do have an ability to foster harmonious relations in the organization. And there's a lot in the book that's around how you really want harmony to surround you like a fortress. That's actually how you're able to be effective in trying to improve the way the organization works. So then the question is quite different. It's not so much about are we able to get our ideal vision of what agility is to happen? And it's more around how do we build the human relations in the organization that are going to generate that by themselves when we're long gone.
I think perhaps we're missing a word about the structure of the book. So we see here that it's from part one, flow, and you have three parts. So can you say a little bit something about the division into three mindset, parts, intentions?
Okay. So the traditional version of the traditional translation, okay. The Chinese traditional translation, the one that you get if you go into a bookstore and buy an English translation of, or a Western translation of Lao Tzu, or if you buy a Chinese version of the book, you'll see 81 chapters in two parts. Well, the reason for 81 chapters is because somewhere along the way, some numerologists got a hold of the thing and they reordered it all to fit their numerological ideas, which of course has nothing to do with anything that's particularly relevant to any of us. And they just basically chopped it up and jumbled it. Also, when it was scrolled on, carved into bamboo slats, tied together with string, well, the string rots, and the bamboo slats get all jumbled up, and so on. So the two parts of the book and the division into 81 chapters is completely arbitrary, happened long after the poem itself was written down. And the poem has almost no punctuation or poems. And we don't really know whether this isn't a bunch of things from a bunch of different sources. So, for example, the very oldest version we have of this, the Guodian version, again, I'm not pronouncing it correctly because I speak Chinese in that sense, that's like less than half of the modern poem. Modern, I mean, 2,500-year-old poem is there. So where did the rest come from? Maybe it was someone going, yeah, this is a bit like the Bhagavad Gita, we'll slap them together, or maybe something completely different happened. Or maybe there were tomb robbers and it's just that half of that poem was literally stolen by someone else. We don't know. Point is, when we approach this thing, the way I'm approaching it is, let's look at where there are clear subject matter flows between parts and try to plug it back together that way. And I'm being enormously presumptuous in saying that, and that's okay, because I'm not even certain that there ever was an original version of this poem with any structure in it whatsoever. I think that maybe a lot of the meaning has evolved as it's gone from person to person, translator to translator, period to period. The language behind it has evolved. In the West, we have some basis for saying that we can relate directly to this poem, thanks to a fellow named Leibniz. Or Leibniz, anyway, Leibniz about 300 years ago got some of the very earliest Catholic translations of the Tao Te Ching and the I Ching and so on. He wrote a book called The Monadology, which, as far as I can see, is his attempt to translate the Tao Te Ching, the Lao Tzu, into his context. Now, Leibniz also came up with a binary number system and the first digital computers. Well, they were clockwork, nevertheless. And so, since a lot of where Agile comes from has to do with software, it's fair to think that there is a thread of interpretation, of understanding how we work together that was influenced by this particular exposure of this particular guy. Leibniz was an astonishing polymath in the time of Newton. Sorry, go ahead, Dov.
Yeah, but what interests me more is what interests me more than the history of it is what distinguishes the three parts. Like the middle one is about agility. The first one is about.
Cool. Okay, so we love to talk in the Agile world about the state of flow, both in terms of, we think about value flow and workflow and learning flow. If we think about triple loop learning, a la XScale, which we're not talking about today. When I talk about XScale, I can talk until the cows come home, but that's what we're sort of avoiding today. So flow as a mental state, this is something we think about in a very specific context in most of our conversations. We think about the mind as being something that your brain is doing for you, and that you are apart from the rest of the universe. That's not the concept of mind that's baked into Taoism, it's baked into Lao Tzu. The first part, the very first chapter, is really around mind as a continuous surface upon which we are waves or ripples. As individuals, we are all connected. And the connection has to do with our sharing thoughts in the way that we are doing right now. A lot of the thoughts that we have in our heads are just copies of things that we've heard. Maybe they have been massaged a bit. There might be reflections and refractions of other waves on that surface. But that idea of mind as a continuum, that's a really interesting thing from an Agile perspective to take on. So flow then is kind of a way of, that section is exploring that way of understanding this way, this social way of being from a very rudimentary philosophical basis. The second part, agility. I mean, Agile, it comes up in the first part. The second part is trying to give us useful, concrete, practical things we can do as Agilists. At least that's the way I was thinking about it. The third part, harmony. This is a word we don't use much in an Agile culture. But if we think of harmony in the sense of mutual benefit, we're trying to develop, we often say learning organizations. But when we talk about a learning ecosystem in an organization, we're usually thinking about, we want learning to flow because it's going to be mutually beneficial to everybody in the organization. We have this vision of a harmonious organization. So a lot of Lao Tzu is actually, I would contrast to Dov's interpretation that it's critical of leaders. I think a lot of Lao Tzu is advice to a leader. And so I tried to take most of that advice and put it into a section of its own, because it has a very different flavor to the other two. Now, rereading the second and third sections today, I went, ooh, I think maybe I need to split it into 4. But that's probably something for tomorrow, not today.
And this is something fascinating, because I think the attempt to take a book which is, a canonical book, and apply the XP patterns of refactoring, and to cut and to paste and to eliminate from here and to rename variables. And how many poems do you have?
I think at the moment it's 69.
Yeah.
But there's at least one that needs to split it. Let's say 70.
So also deleting code in the process, right? So you
deleting. That's something I'm pretty careful about. There's no lines in the Chinese that have been left out. Even where there appears to be duplication, if you look at this in context, I don't see it as duplication. I see there's quite a lot where because it is a poem, because it tries to be an oral tradition, there's a lot of stuff where there are similar forms to the way things are set up. But the point of each of the individual lines and each of these individual stanzas, they always, at least in my view, have a reason for being. And there's nothing where I'd go, oh, I would chop it out. But in the sense of refactoring, there's lots where you'd go, well, these things have a commonality that isn't revealed by the traditional ordering. So why don't we bring them together so you can actually understand the flow, that commonality? And also this idea of we want self-documenting. We want cycles of dependency between parts of the poem. We want them to become explicit as stanzas or as chapters. So the intent is very much an XP refactoring kind of exercise. You're muted, Dov.
I know, because tons of trucks. No, I'm not muted. There's tons of trucks in the background, so I'm trying to eliminate that. I would love you to take another. I know you prepared some segments to read. Can we hear something from the middle part, from the agility part?
Sure.
Only slowly and close to the microphone.
No, all right. I'll be that respectful anyway. Let's see. 21, I think, was where I wanted to go next. So let me go there.
Yeah, the screen.
Yeah, just a moment. And let me share a screen, because I think you turned screen sharing off for me, which is good. So if I go to share screen, and I'll go
and while you share, my idea of this talk was that it belongs to the participants as much as it belongs to us. So if any of you wants to comment, add something they don't understand, something they don't agree with, or even bring, which is for me the curious part, bring what happens in your organization that you would love to hear what Lao Tzu would have maybe said about it. Just bring it on.
Yeah, I would like to second Dov's request. There's, we do this podcast around this thing, and we've really just started scratching the surface. We've done maybe a dozen episodes, and that's good fun. But I am much more interested in seeing whether we can get some value for the people who are here, if they could actually apply, than trying to gas on at length about any of this stuff. And I, as you can tell, have infinite amounts of gas. Maybe I should read this one, Dov. What do you think? While people are gathering their thoughts, then we can open the floor.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Slowly.
Okay, so I should say the Roman numerals, that's basically how you can track this back to the traditional numbering. In some of these chapters, you'll see that they tracked back to the most, one of them is tracked back to like 6 different chapters. And so, but at least you can go tracing if you want to. Okay, the end of agility.
So this is the version control of your book, right?
It's primitive, but I do have a Git repository for most of the work I've done for the last 10 years. So if someone really wants to go through that, it's on GitHub, it's public. Yes, you can go through it and go, man, he's dumb. And that's okay. Okay. People love to talk about agility. Often that's all there is to it. But there are 3 values agility represents and the Agile express: compassion, openness, and discipline. Compassion generates courage, openness, learning, and discipline, flexibility. courage without a warm heart, learning without an open mind, or flexibility without a coiled spine spell the end of agility.
And I love the silence after the reading.
For me, a lot of the work for this, of getting this into a shape where it made sense, because this is one of those parts of the book where the challenge is that there's huge amounts of repetition. It's very little variation in the Chinese, and trying to figure out, well, what can we do with this repetition that's going to say something pithy in English was the challenge. But that last bit about the coiled spine, I think, is where a lot of agilists fail. That we love this idea we're warm-hearted people, we have open minds, we're learning, we're the eternal beginners. But when power exerts itself, we find ourselves in a situation where we can either push back and get fired or roll over and fail. This idea that we can do the rope-a-dope in the sense of Muhammad Ali, Rumble in the Jungle, that we have a coiled spine. It doesn't matter how many times you batter away at us, we're going to find a way to come back, absorb your energy and use it, wear you out with it, and then bring it back. And there's a lot in the second part that sort of gives strategic ways of doing that. I think that's really critical to agility, and not just agility in the sense that we bring to organizations, but I mean, I paddle a surf ski, and surf skis, for those who don't know, are like kayaks, except they're unstable. They're constantly trying to tip over. That's so that you have an ability to go where you want to on a wave or a swell. Well, if you don't have that coiled spine thing going on, you spend all of your time climbing back into the boat. And so that constant making adjustments, back in the original Extreme Programming Embrace Change book, I've been involved with Agile since before that book was published. Beck had this lovely metaphor about how Agile is not about getting the car pointed in the right direction and letting go. It's constant small adjustments. That's the sense that we're getting at here. And so if you've got all the rest of this, but you don't have coiled spine, then you're not bringing it.
Peter, hi, Seth. Really enjoying this. It's great. I'm kind of intrigued by the discipline and flexibility piece.
Yeah,
because I'm thinking about the definition of discipline. If you look up the definition of discipline in a dictionary, and you think about the connotations of discipline, and thinking about the concept of flexibility, that's a bit of an oxymoron there.
Yeah.
What am I missing here?
Okay, so let me bring it back to surf ski, because that's easy. So with surf ski, one of the ways that you make yourself stable, since the boat itself is not stable, is the way that you move the paddle through the water. The paddle has a wing on the end of it. And there's a point where if you bring the paddle to a place just past your hips, that the paddle actually makes you unstable. So you have to develop a discipline in the stroke to be able to both move the paddle, let it slide out using the wing to be able to generate force, and then to be able to bring it out. And even though when you look at someone paddling a surf ski, particularly if you're not paddling yourself, you go, well, it's like walking. It's doing the same thing over and over again. But learning is to be able to do this well, and to have the flexibility to ride waves, to be able to catch swells to downwind. People are able to, on surf skis, they're able to paddle along at 35 knots on downwinding. And it's all about the discipline of how you control the paddle. If you don't have that discipline, well, you're just going to fall on the water. You won't be going at 35 knots. You won't be going at any knots.
Yeah, so for me, that's kind of akin to the idea of deliberate practice.
Yeah.
So by doing something, and that sort of quest for mastery is it's effectively, I guess, in a way, gonna, I don't know, is it too strong to say, kind of liberate you, or at least give you, you know, that confidence to do something effectively within some obvious kind of guardrails and boundaries, etc.
Absolutely.
Am I getting a bit closer?
You are. Well, let's think of it in an XP sense. So with XP, we have this idea of merciless refactoring, that we have to be continuously refactoring to make certain the cost of policy doesn't go super exponential, which is what it does if we don't mercilessly refactor. A lot of Agile has kind of let that slide very much to its own cost. Instead of twice the work in half the time, very soon you have half the work in twice the time, and then it gets worse. Or think about Yagni in an XP sense. You aren't going to need it. Well, if we apply that idea of you aren't going to need it, you either need it right now, so you do it now. There's a maintenance cost to everything. So if you do things before you need them, then you're going to pay a lot of maintenance costs you don't need to pay. If we were to apply that consistently to product backlogs, well, then most of what we're doing with product backlogs in most of the Agile world lacks discipline, because we have those stories that we might never get to. We're wasting time analyzing these stories, putting them in the backlog, but we need to go breadth first and do something. I'll plug Xscale, a 3D Kanban. We can pick up a lot of cycles simply by applying that discipline.
Nice, Peter. Nice stuff.
Cool. So I'm letting Dov steer, so I'm not entirely certain where to go. But if anybody else has something they'd like to ping on this one, I'd be delighted. Or anything that you'd like to talk through, it's all good.
Well, this poem, the one, but also the part about discipline, but also from before when you talked about hope and fear, brought me to put in focus something about the context of agility in, you know, the modern day agility. And I was wondering about the context of this, of Tao, in, you know, thought of as a philosophy. In terms of agility happens, I would say almost all the time when we talk, you know, software development or even other things, in a context where certain things are rigid and it is not up, you know, and they're accepted as such. So for example, if a company cannot pay its bills, it goes into a process of receivership and bankruptcy. If a person cannot pay the mortgage or the rent, there is a process which happens that you lose your home. Now, which means kind of we have to do something to maintain that. We have to do something so that the company doesn't go bankrupt. So not any kind of mistake. Oh yeah, so the company goes bankrupt. Who cares? Life goes on. It's, you know, there is certain things where you say, oh, let's stick to that. Let's do everything to maintain that rigid part. And of course, when you go from personal philosophy, you could say, well, make yourself independent of that. You know, you hope startups and everything goes bust, but life goes on, and that's a cool thing. Or you know, if you don't have a home, then you're more flexible. And there are people who search that way of life, make themselves not vulnerable by not owning a lot. And I was wondering how, you know, how you maneuver, or also how these books and maybe other poems position themselves in this thing, that there is one way of, you know, maybe also in the larger aspect of various forms of Buddhism and so on, kind of how can I make if I don't expect anything, then I'm not vulnerable. This kind of thing. If I'm just, as people usually say, Zen, kind of, yeah, things happen, that's the way, let's go on. And this other thing where we are, or usually what all the context that most of us are in and where we talk about, there are certain things that we don't want to break. There are certain things that we don't want to go down. And so I'm wondering how you relate to this difference.
So it's a really superb question. Thank you for that. I should also mention we have a session, I think it's next week, that
exactly the same time next week.
Sorry, say again?
Exactly the same time next week we have a session.
On the vinegar testers, where Nick Argyle is going to play a Confucian, and what is the Buddhist gentleman's name, Dov?
Amaranato.
Yeah, so he's new to me. But so he's been a real kosher Buddhist monk. He's begged on the street. He's done all of that part, and then tries to bring that perspective from the perspective of how do these things come together. There's a really interesting conversation to have, but I want to have a different conversation here, because I think you're asking a really good concrete question. When it comes to what Dov was saying around, that's not what I want. Is it earlier than that? Yeah, that's the one I want. What Dov was saying around, oh, shit happens. I don't think that actually really reflects what we're trying to get at here. I think if we're passive and just say, well, we just accept what happens, we don't have that coiled spine going on. The idea here is that there are a lot of things we can do to produce harmonious outcomes. And if we take our hands off the wheel and just go, well, the car will crash, shit happens, that's not really what we're trying to do with agility. So this is a poem that, again, in the Chinese, it's kind of just waffling. But there is a clear metaphor in this poem for a river that you see a lot of throughout the Lao Tzu, beginning with chapter 1. But here, the idea, the vision is of someone who is new to, or a stranger to some part of the country, and they're trying to cross a river that's iced over. And I think it goes metaphorically to what you're saying, but I want to bring it to something more practical in just a moment. So if it's okay, I'll give this one a read through, and then we can talk about it. And I think Dov used this for some of the marketing for this session, so I don't mind, even though it wasn't what I wanted to go to. That's okay. Agility is practical, not mystical, a way of working, not a state of grace. And so we're immediately stepping away from, well, you know, we just need to be enlightened and accept everything that happens. Listening as if crossing thin ice. If you're crossing thin ice, you're listening awfully carefully. Beck, in the original XP book, which I'm not certain why I'm harking back to so much now, but that's okay, said that there's listening, testing, coding, and refactoring. That's all there is to software. Anyone who tells you different is selling something. Listening was one of his 4 fundamentals, and I think it's baked into Coburn's Heart of Agile as well, and so on. So listening as if crossing thin ice, testing as if surrounded by danger. This is a testing perspective that we don't often see. We see testers think in terms of, well, does it do what the spec says it should do? Or if you think unhappy paths, is it doing things that the business doesn't expect it to do? But if we think, well, actually, in business terms, we are surrounded by danger. Quite apart from the competition, there are lots and lots of ways that we can simply lose business throughput. However we define that, and we can go down a gold rat path there, but for now, let's keep it simple. Those are things that lead to bankruptcy. We are surrounded by danger. And if we test from that perspective, we're going to have a very different set of tests. Learning as in a strange land. We think we understand the people we're working with. We think that we understand the business. We think that we understand software. If we're working in a software context, we think that we understand government. If we're working in a government context, if we're working with business agility as a target, we think we understand that. But the people around us have a very different set of intents, and often they will hook those things up to the same language we're using. So learning as in a strange land, learning, I think, in the sense of flows of learning, means we have to think about, well, what are the channels those flows flow through? And that's very different to the idea of, well, we want our team to learn, or as individuals we want to learn. Simplifying as thawing snow. Well, as snow thaws, it becomes water. And water certainly seems to have a lot less structure than snow, and we could go to a Cynefin and think in those terms. But this idea of simplifying as thawing snow goes to refactoring as well. Maybe refactoring, not just in the sense of refactoring code, refactoring the structure of the business, refactoring the markets, or the way the business deals with its markets. Maybe thinking in terms of the market as an ecosystem, a network of mutual benefit. And that brings us to integrating as the deep woods. That we have this idea that somewhere, if we wander into the forest, somewhere we're going to reach some parts of the forest that have never been visited by humans or an awfully long time ago, where we're experiencing nature. When we head off for a holiday, we often want to get to that sort of wabi-sabi place where we can have that beautiful, forlorn, lonely experience of raw nature, the magic bus from Into the Wild. That might be something we're actually bringing with us when we visit nature. But this idea that there is a deep harmony in the way that long evolving systems have achieved a way of being. I think that's where this is going. And the idea of integrating also goes to refactoring. Leading as the river valley. Well, how does a valley lead anything? The shape of the valley leads the flow of the river. The river will only flow through that shape. So servant leadership is baked in here. If we can establish servant leadership or leadership as a service in the culture we're working with, well, that's a game changer. We have, in a session I'm running next week on the Camelot model, some practice patterns for leadership as a service, which we derive from Apple and from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and permaculture, a couple of other places. And we'll talk about that next week if you come along to the Camelot model session. So then innovating as the spring silt. Well, silt is awfully fertile stuff. It's the fresh mud that's basically sat and rotted underneath the river ice for a long time, and now it's perfect for things to grow. We think of innovation as something that happens in a lab. But if we think this way, then we start to go, well, where is this spring silt in our organization? Is it a matter of, well, we've got some bright young things, we want them to be plugged together? Or is it that we've got some exciting new ideas, but they're not getting properly promoted in the organization? If we have that idea of the, I'm trying to remember the man's name, the 3 business planning horizons. Somebody will think of it and hopefully give us the name. But it's kind of also goes to Beck's 3X idea. We have stuff that is coming out of R&D labs. We have stuff that's currently in production that's generating the business throughput that the business relies on. And in between, we've got some process for getting from one to the other that's usually very poorly defined or very poorly embodied. That's this idea of innovating as the spring silt. So imagine the ice solid or the stream clear. Stop to plan your way ahead. Ignore what moves underfoot. You fall and disappear. Disappear in the sense of maybe you're still there, but the business is going bankrupt. Maybe disappear in the sense of you pushed too hard and you fell through the ice of the organization and you're out. That's happened to most of us as coaches. So this idea of imagining the ice solid, this is a fiction. The ice is not solid. Imagine the stream was clear. The stream is not clear. If the stream was clear, then we wouldn't have a job. The stream is obscured by the ice. Stop to plan your way ahead. You can't do that on thin ice. And as agilists, we are often on thin ice. So ignore what moves underfoot. You're basically sacrificing your ability to get across or to continue getting across the ice, because it's not like the thin ice stops. You're sacrificing that ability for some momentary certainty. This is a very common circumstance for our clients and for us where, well, we think we've got this thing wired. Usually that's when something slaps us in the face and we get a big surprise. So that idea of listening as if crossing thin ice, testing, learning, this is the discipline we have to bring to this. And it's not a discipline that's going to get us to the other side of the river. It's just going to keep us from falling through. I hope that was a good enough answer.
Yeah, and I want to answer to Bernard as well in a shorter phrase. There is another alternative to keeping something or breaking it, which is nudging it. And I think nothing is really solid. As a kid, I remember how amazed I was when I found out that rocks are liquid. That when you see rocks and they look the same, but in fact you see that they're slowly dripping. You can't see that. Everything is changing all the time. So the alternative to keeping it as it is because you don't want to mess with it or breaking it is just to nudge it a little bit to see where it can stand better. What other posture that is close to this one but a little bit different can it take? And this duality of either you break it or you keep it is often deceiving, because I think in agile transformation, the transformation happens in the space between a duality, a dichotomy, if you want.
Yeah, I love the way you put that. We build a world out of dualities and distinctions, and what's actually going on is between them, is inside, is outside of the frame of them.
I think it's also interesting because it points out maybe to something which sometimes is a bit of a blind spot maybe in Agile, that there is a desire for security and certainty. So I work a lot at the interface between, Agile software developers and usually people who are not in software and somewhere else. And then you have these guys say, hey, don't be so rigid, let's be more open and all these kind of things. But when then management comes and said, hey, we have a new ownership, a new strategy, we are totally reorganizing, everybody can sign up for their jobs, but nobody is certain to get them. They say, what? I haven't signed up for that. What are you doing? So there is a legitimate desire for also things which are certain and stable. And it's interesting to look at the connection. So if you have stable teams, or which you give them the time to develop a certain way of understanding each other and develop trust, then you can be more flexible on the product side, for example.
Yeah.
And,
so
what I see sometimes is that this is kind of not talked about. And I like this, especially the last poem that you've shown, because it invites to do exactly that. Let's talk about both sides.
Okay, so I want to give everybody a chance to duck in. I hope that other people will as well. But I'm really delighted to continue on.
Jeremy put a comment that I'm curious about.
Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So this notion is pretty commonplace, right? That conflates acceptance with passivity, right? That fuses this idea of accepting, then I just let the world wash over me. But acceptance can also be a very active way of, let me accept what is happening around me so that I can become into better relationship with it, that I can manage with what's going on, right? And this is very related to agency as I see it.
Yeah.
There is a saying that I love. It says, it's easier to ride the horse in the direction it's going. Okay? And when you ride the horse in the direction it's going, it's not that you accept where it's going, but again, the concept of nudge, like if you ride a horse where it's going and you look to another place, you just have to look and the horse will turn a little bit in that direction unless there's a conflict between you. So instead of just accepting and passively, being tied to the horse and just taken for the ride, your will merges with the will of whatever you're riding.
Yeah, that's not the one I want. Yeah, so the point on acceptance not just being passive, that was kind of in that second chapter that we were looking at as well. But there's a series in the middle of part 3 that kind of goes to this idea that I think it's the one actually before this, maybe, that I wanted. Oh, maybe it's not. I'm going to spend too long chopping and changing. I'll go to the one I was going to anyway. That's all right. So there's a secret to conquest. Generation upon generation learn to their sorrow. Conquest doesn't secure peace. No one seeks grief, fear, or hatred, but these are all rewards of conquest. There is a secret to surrender. Without effort, needing no breach to enter, ideas subvert the strongest force. As invasion without bloodshed, by thought without form, passes beneath the conqueror's notice. Once we accept that the business is going in a particular direction, the management's going in a particular direction, well, that gives us an agency that we can work with. We can say, right, well, that's beautiful. Now let's find a way to build a will in the organization to change the direction the horse is going. If we try to hold it up short and go, no, I'm going to conquer this organization, I'm going to go hard at it, and I'm going to get this to become what I want it to be, that's not going to work out very well. There's a line in the chapter I was looking for, we didn't find. I found it. These are the secrets of subversion. As a fish should not rise from its depths, a sword should not leave its scabbard, nor a host neglect their guests. And then the one before, the stanza before that, to overthrow someone, first support them, to take from someone, first supply them, to control their power, first channel it, to stop their influence, first transmit it. Until you have got yourself into a situation where you can do this with integrity, you are not there keeping secrets and trying to be a bad actor. You're there trying to inform the approach to generate a better outcome. So if we look at it that way, if you've been hired into an organization and the reason you're there is to get that good outcome, you're facing a bunch of people who are going in a direction you know is not going to lead to that outcome, then you have to start by building sufficient trust networks in the organization to be able to start to demonstrate that outcome. That's the only thing that's going to influence those folks. So the beauty of this line about a host should not neglect their guests. If we look at the people we're working with in the organization as the guests, then once they're going in a particular direction, they're getting outcomes, the host, the management, can't neglect them. They've got to go, okay, well, I'm going to have to harmonize with them. So you don't need to express your power as an agile coach in a confrontational way. What you need to do is find a way to build a harmonious network that's going to be going and demonstrating the learning and business outcomes that you've been hired to produce. One of the things that we do in Excel stuff is we have this thing we call a pull transformation. It's all about, we want to completely avoid confronting the old guard of the organization. We want to build the kernel of a new organization that actually has the qualities we've been hired to produce, and then grow it. And that's kind of going in this direction with integrity. So, if nobody else has anything else, I did have a chapter I wanted to go to.
Go ahead. Is it all right? I just remind us that we have about 15 minutes to go. So
okay.
While you look for the chapter, I'd love people to share what does this session as a whole echoes in them. Does it connect you to a vision that agility is less about doing this method or that method, and more on examining mindsets that even words have a hard time connecting to? Or what does it present?
I still want to add. So I'm very new in all this stuff because I'm joining the conversation because I just got to know Dov, and actually I'm also very new to agility. So I love it how you guys combine the history-proven wisdom with agility techniques. But I do feel that I still miss like a bit of a background just to understand actually what you guys are talking about. So I have a very, very basic question, and that's one: how do I get how to get more information about agility in general? And secondly, also you had mentioned there were several books about Lao Tzu, and different translations. And which one would you recommend on reading?
So I would recommend the one we're discussing, which is the one that Peter wrote, and you can get it in a site called LeanPub. Just look up the Agile Tao. And about learning more about agility, Ula, I really don't know. I'm so much in it that I don't know how to recommend the book. But if someone has recommendation, just put them in the chat.
It's like asking a fish how to breathe water. So I guess I would have some recommendations on agility. Apart from starting with the manifesto, I mentioned before, there's a book that Kent Beck wrote way back at the start of this, before the Agile Manifesto, called Extreme Programming, Embrace Change. And if you can get the first edition of that book, not the second edition, because unfortunately Beck has the same problem I do and can't resist tweaking some things. The first edition was really crystal. And that's not to say it was Alistair Coburn's crystal, it was Beck's crystal, and it was really the gem that kicked all this stuff off. I would start anybody with that book, even though it's very software and geeky, it would still provide you with an ability to go, oh, well, there's some nice terra firma under our feet. Now let me start to approach the rest of this stuff. Okay.
So you got your homework, it's good.
Yeah. So I should probably do one more thing though. If we're talking about basics, we've used this word Tao quite a lot, and we haven't given any definition for it. That's problematic. There's in the first chapter of this book, which I'm not going to go into now, because even though it's very short, it's something that's going to take several hours of our time to make any kind of a dent in.
If you're curious, there's a chapter there's an episode in the podcast that talks about that.
Yeah, but to give a nutshell, if we think that mind is a continuum, that our communications and our thoughts, that we can think of individual people as waves on this surface. Well, we don't have an ability to access anything without mind. We have to use mind to do this. And so that thing that's underneath the surface of the river, that's what we mean by Tao. And I guess we could try to translate it as life, not in the sense of my life or your life, but sort of the great continuum of life. But that's still living in that world of mind. The best way to get it is to go and learn a bit of Zen, which we're not going to do here, but you can probably sit there and try to figure out the sound of the one hand. If you go and read some Zen books, that might help get at it.
But also in a basic way, it's a way, no?
Well, what the heck does the way mean?
A way is a path, is a process where you go.
Yeah, so the very first line of the Lao Tzu, translated hyperliterally, is the Tao that can be Taoed isn't really the Tao. So if we try to say the way that can be weighed or maybe expressed or followed isn't really the way, then if we think of it as path, we've just lost it. So you start to see why I would prefer thinking
losing
about
it is part of it, no?
Well, we could say, if we translate as life, we could say the life you live isn't really sort of this great life. But the way I usually put it is that life is not the breath in your lungs. Nevertheless, that's just because that was the most convenient way of translating it. There's a lot more depth in it than that. And for now, let's not go down that path because we're trying to do the Agile Tao and not the Tao. I just wanted to give enough of the flavor of it so people who want to go and tease that out can. So given we probably only have 5 or so minutes left.
9.
I'm thinking 9. I'm thinking we might go to the very end of the book instead and have some fun with that. let's cut to the chase. Let's go to the end. So let's see if I go to way down, not that far down. I want to get to here, and I'll do a share screen. Okay, that'll do us. And I think that really goes to the festival as well. So that's rather beautiful. So if I go back to here and do a share screen, which I'll do there and share. Okay. Keep your community small.
Can you just do me a favor? Read at half the speed.
Okay. Keep your community small and its systems simple. Learn science and engineering, but don't depend on them. And keep weapons, but keep them hidden. Sail boats and ride horses, but not far. Teach art and mathematics and study history so you don't repeat it. Grow your own food and make your own clothes. Build snug homes and share your festivals. Dwell within cockcrow of your neighbors, but don't interfere with them. This vision of an agile community, and we can think of it in software terms or in business terms. We can think of it in terms of a community of coaches. We can think of it in terms of the festival that we're attending. I love that idea that what we're doing provides us with an ability to share all of the benefits, but not interfere. And that becomes the way that we can start to think around what agility could mean to us. I like to think of agility as something that generates a learning ecosystem, and that there's a praxis that goes with that. We'll talk about that at the session we're having on Monday on the Camelot model, which I'll give a quick plug. It is really only a model, but at least it is a model, where Spotify model isn't a model. It's something that it is a way to accelerate the flow of learning to our organization. And so we're used to thinking of ourselves as, well, we're way past horse riding civilization. But the good things in life still look like this. That's really, if you could live as is described in this little poem, you'd be pretty happy. If you can have your phone with you and do some work in Zoom rooms at the same time, well, that's even better. But the fundamentals of community, I love the way that this sets it up. I'm not certain where to go with it from here, but since we only had 9 minutes to go, I'll open the floor to anybody.
So anyone can cut me, but what I like about the poems, like this is a good example, but all of them are, is that it's an abstract set of images that I can project on my daily life. Like I can look through this lens at the organization, the structure that I'm working on today, and the problems that I have. And a lot of times, just like I told Bernard, it tweaks, it doesn't shake the reality, but it tweaks it a little bit. It gives a small opening to where things can become possible. So for me, this is why I like the book.
For me, this goes to this idea of descaling. That the point of what we're trying to do in bringing agile to organizations is still about small, self-organizing, autonomous teams that don't interfere with each other. How do we get them aligned to be able to achieve business outcomes? That's not about scaling agility. It's about trying to reduce the meeting sizes, to reduce the distance between doers and deciders, to reduce the amount of time it takes for feedback to occur. It's something that there's a mathematics to doing this. But in terms of the objective, I love the way this sums it up. Keep your community small and its systems simple. That we lose when we start talking about scale, this and that.
may I make a remark?
Please.
So it's Patrick here. Hi, Dov. Hi, Peter. For me, from what I hear and what I feel and live about agility is that we bring together reason and emotions, and not or. And moreover, it's also emotions are deep in the heart, and reason with a clarity of mind, and not reason like the like this. Yes. And that's the point we miss in our companies today, where we use agile by the book or agile to perform, etc.
Yeah, open mind, warm heart, coiled spine. That's where we started this conversation. Exactly right. Without any one of those, we're going to fail.
Okay, so we're about to end the session. And I'd like to do two things. One, to plug in the two other things that, or three even, that I do in the festival. One, as Peter mentioned, is called the Vinegar Tasters, or Peter wanted to call it the Vinegar Testers, which is an attempt to have a debate with the three points of view of the Eastern philosophy about as the festival points, the past, the present, and the future of agility. Like what Lao Tzu would have to say about all of this, you probably heard here, but not in a debate form. And you already heard, if you were here in the beginning, about Confucius, and of course the master, right, the Buddha. So we'll have three people who try to represent through their own lens and without any guarantee how they see, how they would have seen through the eyes of their mentors, the agile road. This is one session. The other session is a strange one. It's a silent retrospective. So there is no facilitator there. You will log in and you will have a path as a group of your own without any words and without any live facilitator. We'll see how it goes. And the third one perhaps is even stranger. Every day I have half an hour of eye contact. It's an experiment, and I guess that next week I'll change the platform to something else. So we'll see how it functions both ways. This is my plugin. Peter, do you have anything to plug in before I do the last exercise that I want to do today?
So Monday we've got, it's Tuesday in Australia, but Monday for everywhere else, we've got the Camelot model, which is a very practically oriented session talking about how we can overcome the challenges of getting small teams in Zoom rooms because of COVID aligned to achieve the outcomes of large agile programs with a minimum of fuss. And that's leading into a series of online games we're running in March, the Games Without Thrones. And then so that's this coming week. And the week after that, I'm running a session called Agile in Space, which is basically looking at, well, if we were really to take this agility to the utmost, what could we do with an agile civilization? How would agility be important for getting off this planet? And so it's going to be a very visionary utopian kind of a session, and we'll be looking at alga culture and fusion and augmented reality and 3D printed everything and all kinds of exciting, weird things that you might not have heard about. And hopefully I'll be learning some things that I haven't heard about. So so that's gonna be a fun one.
Great. And the exercise I would love to end this with is, I would like you to open your microphones and say in one sentence, what are you left with when you are leaving the session?
The beauty of metaphor.
Peace and curiosity.
serenity.
The harmony with the environment.
Oui, allô?
Phone call, I guess. Anyone else?
A desire to see agility through a different lens.
Resonance for me.
So for me, it's a big calm.
I've spoken too much.
But you always do. Thanks a lot, and see you next time, I guess. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank
Dov.
you. Bye.